Greetings, justice seekers. Welcome to Justice, Not Justice, Season 1, Episode 34. So we just received some very disconcerting, disappointing, yet wholly unsurprising news, which is that Jeremiah's appeal regarding the harassment injunction was denied or not upheld. Totally not surprised by this, but it's just affirmation that there's like nothing that anybody can do to get any justice, at least in the Wisconsin court systems, it seems, because they basically, they can find case law to support any opinion that they state in their response or their determination. We made it very clear in a very compelling argument that the inability to introduce any evidence at all is problematic in a hearing. And that was the case in Jeremiah's harassment injunction hearing. He was allowed to introduce zero evidence. He also... There were also a lot of other problems, as were discussed in the last video, about the way that hearing was conducted. And he not only was not allowed to introduce evidence, but he requested to be able to do so 24 times, okay? 24 times. And on 22 additional occasions, asked the court to please allow him to show audio and video evidence as the other side was being allowed to do. So that's 46 attempts right there to please allow me to introduce some evidence. Please allow me to receive a fair hearing. So I'm not going to go through the whole opinion, but to speak to some of these points. So first of all, when looking at an appeal, when the appellate court, at least in Wisconsin, looks at an appeal regarding bias, about a judge, they have to satisfy both a subjective and an objective test, okay? And according to them, a determination by the circuit court that it is not biased is sufficient to satisfy the subjective test. So in other words, all the court has to do is say, oh, I'm not biased, and that part is satisfied. State versus Rochelle, that was the case study, Rochelt, case cited. I'm going to check into that. They pull things out of context and only use the sentences that fit. Regarding the object, so like subjective check, she's not biased. She said she wasn't. And then regarding objective test, they assume that a judge is fair and impartial and capable of ignoring biasing influences. Opinions formed by a judge based upon facts introduced or events occurring during the course of a current or prior proceeding involving a party do not constitute a basis for bias or partiality motion unless they display a deep-seated favoritism or antagonism that would make fair judgment impossible. Which she did, clearly, by refusing to allow him to introduce evidence. I mean, we were very clear in showing that she displayed a deep-seated favoritism that would make fair judgment impossible, but they chose to just completely ignore that. Now, I'm going to say one other thing about that particular sentence, because later in their opinion, they argue that Jeremiah was trying to give a context to the whole hearing, but that there was no evidence that they could look at, and so therefore they can't consider something they don't know about. But they just said that judges can consider events prior proceedings. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. So they're saying, well, we can't know anything about something that happened in a prior proceeding, except for we can And then in a footnote, so here's what happened in the appeal. Because Jeremiah was not allowed to introduce any evidence, we attempted, by providing a 100-page appendix, to provide the evidence that he was going to have presented and which he should have been allowed to present, and which was not allowed to be presented. We provided that as an appendix to the appeal, okay? So that the appellate judges had everything that was being referenced, and they rejected that appendix back in November because the appendix contained documents that were not part of the circuit court record in the instant harassment litigation. We know they weren't part of the record because they weren't allowed to be introduced as part of the record. Infuriating. Oh, and then, so now they're discussing that he was not allowed to introduce any evidence. A circuit court has broad discretion in determining the relevance and admissibility of evidence. So basically saying, they're conceding and agreeing in this opinion that there basically is nothing that a person can do to challenge a circuit court's opinion because they have broad discretion. They can do what they want. They can say what they want. Broad discretion, immunity, all these words that in the Lisa Bangert thing, that the Office of Lawyer Regulation says, oh, great immunity, all this. There's so much language in this system that enables no accountability, absolutely zero. And then the circuit court's decisions are okay if a proper exercise of discretion, if they have a reasonable basis and are made in accord with the facts of record. Again, not all of the facts were allowed to be introduced. One-sided, biased, imbalanced. So then they say that there was an absence of an analysis demonstrating that the circuit court erroneously exercised its discretion. 24 times ignoring, not allowing him to introduce evidence, 22 times asking to please be able to access his video and audio so he can, like they were. That's an absence of an analysis. So then, again, regarding bias and the fact that Judge Carroll was ignoring him, interrupting him, and not treating the other party's counsel in the same disrespectful way. A circuit court's ordinary efforts at courtroom administration remain immune from claims of bias. So there's all of this statutes and law about bias, and it all is completely obliterated that ordinary efforts at courtroom administration remain immune from claims of bias. Same thing as with Bangert. You can do what you want. You can say what you want. Nothing anybody can do. And I'm going to look at that case law as well. Okay, so now we were talking about how the bailiff, David Jepson, was aggressive and confrontational always toward Jeremiah as well as to me, and refused to allow him to set up his computer and his evidence so that he could present his case. And they say, well, okay, his recourse was to raise the issue with the circuit court so that it could address the alleged mistreatment, and that he didn't do that. Jeremiah wasn't allowed to do anything. He wasn't allowed to speak much. If he had tried to say, hey, that guy won't, and he did, that guy won't let me access my evidence, nothing was done. So there was an effort to do that, and nothing was done. And even if he had pushed it, he probably would have gotten arrested because they would have perceived him as being confrontational and aggressive. It's just astonishing. So this video went a little bit longer than I was anticipating, and I have to in the next video, I'm going to tell you who these judges are who made these determinations. You might be fascinated. I'll see you soon.